Something's going on with you, and you haven't had the courage to admit it yet. His life slowed down. Things that used to flow quickly now seem stuck. Responses are not coming at the same pace. The movement slowed down, and that messes with your mind, because it seems like a waste of time. It seems delayed. It seems like everyone is moving forward, except you. But I'll get straight to the point, without mincing words. What if this slowdown isn't a mistake, but an adjustment? What if your life isn't blocking you, but repositioning you? Stay until the end, because what you're experiencing now is exactly the point where most people give up, without realizing they were inches away from their own transformation. The first sign that your life is about to change isn't visible growth. It's a reduction, noise reduction, reducing excess, reduction of urgency, and it starts within you, not outside. You start to get out of autopilot, but not consciously at first. You only start to realize that something doesn't fit anymore. What once seemed extremely important no longer carries the same weight. The need to always be doing something starts to get tiring. The excess of stimuli, information, and demands begins to feel overwhelming. And the strangest thing of all, your mind begins to slow down. Thoughts that once came in an avalanche are beginning to subside. The internal noise is losing intensity. You no longer feel obligated to react to everything. And that, at first, is frightening, because you've been conditioned to believe that a fast-paced mind is a sign of productivity. But it isn't. It's a sign of internal disorganization. What's happening now is the opposite of that. Your mind is reorganizing itself. And when that happens, time changes. Not clock time, the time of perception. Before, everything was rushed. Everything was urgent. Everything seemed for yesterday. Now there is space. You start to realize what you're doing. You feel the moment as it happens. You're no longer completely lost in the next thing. And this completely changes the quality of your energy. Because while you were living on autopilot, your energy was being wasted on everything. Now she's starting to come back to you. And when the power comes back on, something inevitable happens. Clarity. You start thinking better, not faster. There is a huge difference between these two things. Thinking fast is reaction. Thinking clearly is about direction. And you start to lose momentum. Before, any situation would pull you in. Any emotion could carry you away. Any external pressure determined his response. Not now. There is now a break. A space between what happens and what you decide to do. And it is precisely in this space that your life begins to change. Because that's where real control is born. You start by observing before you react. Start questioning before deciding. You start to realize what's worth your energy and what's just draining you. Anxiety begins to lose its power. Not because your life has solved everything, but why did you stop feeding the chaos within your mind? And that's profound. Because for a long time, you believed you needed to rush faster to sort out your life. But now you're noticing something uncomfortable. Running too fast, that's exactly what kept you trapped. And this is where a conflict arises. Part of you still longs for the old speed. I want a quick answer. It needs validation. You want to feel like you're going somewhere. But another part, quieter, firmer. He already understood that that pace was unsustainable. And you start to find yourself torn between these two versions. This is not confusion, this is transition. You are not lost. You are ceasing to be someone who needed to live in chaos, and becoming someone who can sustain clarity. And that requires slowing down. Now answer me honestly. That feeling that everything has slowed down, is it bothering you? Or have you already realized deep down that something inside you is getting stronger? And when that clarity begins to take hold within you, something even deeper changes. Control begins to shift from the external world and starts to originate within you. Before, you lived by reacting. He reacted to what people did. He reacted to what went wrong. It reacted to what you couldn't control. It was as if their stability depended on everything being right outside. And that made you vulnerable. Any external change disrupted his internal state. Any frustration would throw you off balance. Any uncertainty turned into anxiety. Now watch what's happening. You still feel it, But it's not lost like it used to be. The emotion comes, but it doesn't automatically sweep you away. The problem arises, but it doesn't control you. Discomfort arises, but it no longer defines who you are at that moment. There is space, a space that didn't exist before. And this space represents one of the greatest internal transformations someone can experience. Because it is in that the control, that true control is born, not the need to control everything, but the control of not being dominated by anything. You start to realize that you don't need to react to everything. Not everything deserves your energy. Not every situation requires an immediate response. And that completely changes your relationship with life. Because when you don't react automatically, you choose. And those who choose stop living in survival mode. You begin to feel a stability that doesn't depend so much on what happens outside. Peace is not yet a constant, but she's starting to appear as a reference. And every time you get lost, you know you can come back. This is new. Because before, when you lost your balance, it took a long time to get back on track. Sometimes he wouldn't even come back. Now there is awareness. And this awareness begins to alter the field around it. Without visible effort, no forced attempt. You start to stop chasing after things. And he realizes something that previously seemed impossible. Things are starting to come together. Not all at once, not perfectly, but with more fluidity, with less wear and tear, with less of a feeling of constant struggle. And this doesn't happen by chance. It happens because you stopped vibrating with urgency all the time. He stopped acting because of the lack of action. He stopped trying to control everything for fear of losing. And when that decreases, resistance decreases along with it. And where there is no resistance, the flow enters. But along with this new state comes a side effect that many people don't understand. Distractions begin to lose all meaning. What once captivated you for hours no longer holds your attention. It's not discipline. It's genuine disinterest. Shallow conversations start to bore you quickly. Noisy environments start to drain you. Empty content starts to seem unbearable. And that can feel strange. It's as if you were distancing yourself from the world. But it's not a separation. It's refinement. His perception changed. His energy changed. And now, anything that's not on the same wavelength simply doesn't fit anymore. The need for external validation is beginning to decrease. You no longer feel the need to explain everything as much. You don't need to prove it so much anymore. Feeling safe no longer depends so much on approval. And that's liberating, but also uncomfortable at first, because you've been conditioned to seek acceptance. And now you're starting to validate yourself from within, and that completely changes your choices. You start to make better selections. Where are you going? Who do you stay with? What do you invest your time in? In what way does it allow you to enter your mind? And that seems simple, but it changes everything. Because before, its energy was fragmented. A little bit here, a little bit over there, a little bit into things that didn't even make sense. Now she is starting to concentrate. And concentrated energy creates direction. Leadership creates results. You start doing less, but with more intention. And that increases the power of everything you do. But this process requires courage, because you'll realize that you can no longer continue in certain environments. It's no longer possible to sustain certain habits. It's no longer possible to maintain certain connections. And that weighs heavily, because it's not just about changing behavior, it's about leaving parts of your identity behind. But understand this clearly, you're not losing, you are aligning yourself. And everything that doesn't follow this alignment naturally dissolves. No fighting, effortlessly, without forcing an exit. It simply ceases to make sense. And the more you respect that, but reality is starting to respond more accurately. Now answer me with complete honesty. Have you noticed that you're naturally distancing yourself from certain things? Or are you still trying to stay in places that no longer match who you're becoming? And when you begin to accept this natural distancing, without trying to hold on to what no longer makes sense, something very precise begins to happen around you. It's not a noisy change. It's not something everyone notices. But for you, It becomes impossible to ignore. Your reality is beginning to reorganize itself, and this happens in silence. People who used to be there every day are starting to disappear little by little. There is no fight. There is no single defining event that explains it. The connection simply weakens. Conversations no longer flow. Interests cease to be compatible. The energy doesn't fit together like it used to. And this can create internal doubt. You start to wonder if you did something wrong, if you're drifting too far away, if you're becoming a difficult person. But the truth is different. You're not distancing yourself from people. You are getting closer to who you really are. And anything that doesn't fit with this version naturally loses its place. This is not rejection. It's a vibrational incompatibility. And the more you try to force permanence, the more discomfort you feel. Because deep down, you've already figured it out. It no longer makes sense. And at the same time that this is happening, something new begins to take shape. Different connections are beginning to emerge, and they have a very clear characteristic. They require no effort to exist. You don't need to adapt. There's no need to measure every word. There's no need to maintain a version of events that isn't true. There is lightness. There is a presence. There is a sense of recognition, as if that connection wasn't being created, but found again. And that completely changes the way you relate to others. Because for the first time, you understand that true connection doesn't get old. It doesn't drain. Don't confuse them. It stabilizes. It expands. And this begins to reflect in all areas of your life, even in opportunities. Before, everything seemed difficult. You needed to insist a lot, forcing situations, chasing after everything. And even so, it always seemed like something was getting in the way, as if there were an invisible resistance. Now watch what begins to happen. Things don't magically appear, but they come with less blocking. Paths are beginning to open up more naturally. Answers appear at the right time. Decisions are starting to fall into place. You start noticing coincidences that don't seem like coincidences at all. Meetings that make sense. Information that arrives at the exact time. Situations that work themselves out without you needing to control everything. And that changes your perception. Because before, you believed you needed to push life forward. Now you begin to realize that when there is alignment, life responds. And that doesn't eliminate the movement, but it transforms its quality. Because that's where a change comes in that defines the entire process, the way you act. Previously, his actions stemmed from pressure. Pressure to succeed, pressure not to fail, pressure to keep up with the pace of others. And that put you in a constant state of tension. You did a lot, but without presence, without a clear direction, disconnected from what truly mattered. Not now. Now your action begins to emerge from a different place. Intention. You no longer do things just for the sake of doing them. You do it because you understand, because he feels it, because it makes internal sense. And that completely changes the impact of each of your moves. You reduce quantity and increase precision. You stop trying everything and start choosing better. You no longer react impulsively. You respond consciously. And this eliminates a large part of the errors that used to hold you back. Because most mistakes didn't stem from a lack of ability. It came from excessive movement without alignment. Now there is direction. And steering saves energy. Energy saved is concentrated. Concentrated energy produces results. And that's starting to show, gradually, but consistent. You realize you need fewer attempts to make progress, less effort to create results, less strain to maintain progress. And that shatters a very deep-seated belief. The belief that everything needs to be difficult, that everything must require suffering. Extreme effort is a sign that you're on the right track. Now you are beginning to see clearly. When there is alignment, there is fluidity. And that doesn't mean it's completely easy. It means the absence of unnecessary resistance. It means you are no longer fighting against yourself. And that changes everything. Because for a long time, the biggest obstacle wasn't external. It was internal. It was uncertain. It was fear. It was urgent. It was a need to control everything. Now this is starting to decrease, and when that diminishes, the path opens up. You start to trust more, not in promises, but in the real experience that you are living. You realize that every movement you make now has more power, more impact, more consistency, compared to dozens of desperate moves made in the past, and this generates something very important. Stability, less anxiety, less of a rush, less need to prove it, more presence, more awareness, more direction. And when you move like that, the result is no longer an attempt, and it's starting to become a consequence. Now answer me with complete honesty. Do you still feel like you have to force everything to make it work? Have you noticed that when you truly align yourself, reality itself begins to organize itself in your favor? And as you begin to act with more intention, without that old rush, without that constant urge to do everything at once, something very quiet begins to grow inside you. And that's one of the most important points in this whole process, because it's not something that others see. It's not something that generates immediate external validation. And often, even you can't explain it, but you can feel it. There is an expansion happening within you, an expansion that makes no noise, that doesn't need an announcement, that which does not depend on applause, but that completely changes who you are. And that's exactly the most challenging part. On the outside, not everything has changed yet. Your external reality may seem similar. Some situations are still being resolved. Certain areas of your life haven't yet taken the leap you're hoping for. And this can create doubt. It can give the feeling that nothing is happening. But if you stop and observe honestly, you realize you don't think like you used to. You don't react like you used to. You don't feel the same way anymore. And this is irreversible. Things that used to consume you now pass by much faster. Situations that used to completely throw you off balance. Today, you navigate them with much more awareness. Old patterns are starting to lose their effectiveness. Not because you are fighting against them, but because they no longer match who you are becoming. And that creates a very specific feeling. A feeling of silent growth. You know you're evolving, even without immediate proof, even without external validation, even without anyone looking and saying that you've changed. And this is one of the biggest tests of this process, because for a long time, you've been conditioned to measure your worth by visible results, out of recognition, by external response. For approval, not now. Now you are learning to validate yourself from within, and this completely changes your emotional structure. The need to prove something begins to disappear. You no longer feel such an urgent need to show progress. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to explain your process, because you know, and this knowledge is silent, but extremely powerful. It is an inner certainty that does not depend on argument, and this brings a new stability. You begin to support yourself better emotionally. It's starting to fluctuate less. It's starting to become less easy to lose. And something very important happens along with that. Silence ceases to be uncomfortable. Before, the silence seemed empty. It seemed like something was missing. It seemed like you needed to fill it with distractions, with information, with movement. Not now. Now silence begins to feel like a safe space. A place where you can find yourself. Where do you organize it? Where you listen to yourself. And that's rare, because most people can't stay silent without feeling uncomfortable. But you begin to realize that it is precisely in the silence that everything falls into place, that your ideas become clearer, may your emotions stabilize, that your energy is being reorganized. And the more you allow yourself to stay in that state, the stronger you become, without external effort. No need to prove it, no need to accelerate. You begin to build a solid internal foundation. And this foundation is what sustains real change. Because true change doesn't begin outside. It begins within, and then is reflected. But there's a point here that almost no one talks about. This inner growth can seem lonely, because you start to notice things that you didn't notice before. You start to see patterns that were previously considered normal. You begin to mentally distance yourself from behaviors that you previously accepted. And this creates a feeling of separation. Not because you want to isolate yourself, but because you can no longer pretend you don't see. And that's part of it. You're not withdrawing from the world. You are getting closer to your awareness. And that requires maturity. Presence is required. It takes courage to uphold this new version, even without applause, even without immediate confirmation. But understand this clearly. If you can already perceive this change within yourself, so the process has already begun, and what begins within will inevitably appear outside. It's simply a matter of continuity. Now answer me with complete honesty. You already recognize this expansion happening within you? Or are you still waiting for something to change on the outside before you believe you're evolving? And when you reach this point in the process, the quietest and most powerful change begins to happen. The way you perceive time changes completely, and that changes everything. Because for almost his entire life, time was a burden. It always seemed like it was coming to an end. It always seemed like you were late. There was always a feeling that I needed to run faster, do more, solve things quicker. It was as if there was a constant invisible charge, a pressure that wouldn't go away. You would wake up already feeling like you needed to achieve something. She spent her days trying to keep up with a pace that never seemed enough. And even when he did a lot, it still seemed like too little. This is exhausting. This is exhausting. This disrupts your energy in a way that you don't even realize, because living solely for the sake of time takes you away from the present moment. And it always lets you down. But now honestly observe what is happening inside you. This urgency is starting to lose momentum. Not in a forced way, not because you decided to be calmer, but because something inside you understood that this urgency wasn't taking you where you wanted to go. You start to realize that speeding up wasn't solving the problem. It was only distancing you from yourself. And that changes your relationship with time. You stop seeing time as the enemy, and he begins to see it as a process. The process requires pace, and rhythm cannot be forced. You begin to realize that everything has its own maturation time. Trying to anticipate only makes things worse. Trying to control it only generates anxiety. And this understanding is not theoretical. It is felt. You feel like you don't need to run the same way anymore. You're still moving. But don't run over anyone. You're still acting. But the pressure isn't applied in the same way. You are still building, but without that constant pressure of needing to get it right immediately. And this completely changes the quality of your energy, because when you leave the emergency room, you enter the presence. Presence is power. You start to become immersed in what you're doing. Not with half my mind in the future, no, not with another party stuck in the past, but whole. And this increases the power of each of your actions, because a present action is worth more than 10 actions done in haste. At the same time, anxiety begins to lose ground, and not because his life solved everything, but why did you stop trying to control what isn't ready yet? You begin to understand that anxiety is, in essence, an attempt to anticipate an outcome that has not yet matured. And when you let go of that attempt, something inside you relaxes. You don't give up. You trust me, and trusting is not passivity. It's alignment. It's about doing what needs to be done without conflicting with the timing of things. And that takes you to the final level of this process, the opening to receive. Because here's a truth that almost nobody realizes. Many people know how to wish, but he doesn't know how to receive. For a long time, you wanted this. I wanted to change. I wanted to grow up. I wanted to experience something different. But at the same time, it was blocking me. I was blocking it out of doubt. I blocked it out of fear. He blocked me out of distrust. It was as if one part of him was asking for it, and another part was preventing it. And that created a cycle. You were trying hard, but it wasn't flowing. You tried, but you froze. You would move forward, but then come back. Now that's starting to change, because as you align yourself internally, resistance is starting to weaken. You stop rejecting what comes your way. Stop thinking it's not for you. Stop automatically distrusting anything good. Stop sabotaging small opportunities that could grow. And that's subtle, but crucial. You start to allow it. Allow life to function, allow things to organize themselves, allow what you ask for to find space to arrive. And that requires maturity. Because receiving isn't as simple as it seems. Receiving requires you to provide for yourself. Stand by what you asked for. Maintain the lifestyle you want to live. Nurture the new version of yourself without reverting to old patterns. And then you start doing that without fully realizing it at first. But it's already happening. You start to accept it more naturally. It's starting to block less. Start trusting the flow more. And something very important happens at this point. You start experiencing the outcome before it's complete, not in its final form, but in the feeling, in identity. It depends on how you position yourself. And that changes everything. Because reality doesn't respond to what you want in the future. It responds to what you already stand for now. And you start to support it differently, more stable, more present, more aligned. And then everything makes sense. That phase where everything slowed down, it wasn't a problem. It was preparation. It was fine-tuning. It was life taking you out of a disorganized rhythm and putting you into an aligned flow. You weren't being delayed. You were being organized, repositioned, strengthened internally to support what you asked for externally. And if you've made it this far, it's no coincidence. Because most people are unable to sustain that level of awareness. They'll be back. They return in a hurry. They return to the noise. They switch back to automatic mode, but you stayed. And that already says a lot about who you are becoming. Now answer me with complete honesty. Do you still see this phase as a setback? Or are you already able to recognize that your life is being adjusted to a level you didn't have access to before? If this made sense to you, comment, I'm in alignment. And if you've made it this far, subscribe. Because what's starting inside you will still manifest itself in ways you can't predict right now.